Dzień dobry Państwu. Ja nazywam się Mariusz Sierski, jestem rzecznikiem Szkoły Głównej Handlowej w Warszawie i zarazem szefem zespołu prasowego odpowiedzialnego za kontakty z mediami. Zostałem poproszony i upoważniony przez rektora SGH, pana profesora Piotra Wachowiaka, żeby wszystkich Państwa serdecznie powitać z powodu ważnego dla nas seminarium, które zostało zorganizowane we współpracy, na prośbę, z inicjatywy Grupy Banku Światowego i Szkoły Głównej Handlowej w Warszawie. I proszę Państwa, mam przyjemność też ogłosić, że to jest premiera tego budynku. Żadna inna konferencja, żadne inne seminarium jeszcze się tutaj nie odbyło i to jest pierwsze. Cieszymy się, że wyruszamy w tę podróż razem z Bankiem Światowym. Wierzymy, że ta przestrzeń, którą nazwaliśmy przestrzenią innowacji, będzie służyć właśnie innowacji, właśnie wysłuchaniu głosów ekspertów, instytucji, które przynoszą tak nieodzowną w świecie pseudonauki, fake newsów wiedzę i rzetelne fundamenty oceny sytuacji gospodarczej czy finansowej. I've prepared everything in English, but Krzysztof said to me that it's better to address you in Polish. I will just mix up both. Let me just go with my remembrance to 2022. The president of World Bank Gropu, David Malpass, visited SGH, Warsaw School of Economics, addressing challenges to growth, security and stability. It was also a kind of premiere because it was such a big event in the SGH after COVID and containment. So it was something for us that opened somehow the cycle of conferences, seminars, debates and discussions. Let me also mention that 100 years ago, the experimental pavilion, Building A, was just open to public. It was called experimental because then the director of Higher School of Economics, later on Warsaw School of Economics, SGH, Professor Bolesław Miklaszewski was a doctor of chemistry. And he was convinced that chemistry is something in this, necessary to, for the commerce, for commercial activities. Every room in this building A, the oldest building of the campus, was designed as the chemistry laboratory. It was a kind of visionary in this type, because if we take the technical gases and we see how it is important for the food market, we can see that he was a kind of someone looking far in the future. The same here, I suppose, now with the growing importance of the artificial intelligence, digitalization, we are not able even to foresee what would be the next step of this innovation, and we hope that this building will serve our scholars, our students, and our friends as well from different institutions. Simultaneous the translation is provided, as you know. There was also the information about transmission online. Unfortunately, we are unable to ensure it today, but transmission, everything would be enregistered, and you will find all the panels, discussions, and all debates and presentations there at YouTube SGH channel. So I invite you also to see it. Let me warmly, on behalf of the rector and other rectors, prorectors of the Warsaw School of Economics, welcome Anna Akhalkatsi, World Bank Country Director for the European Union. Let me also welcome among us Deputy Minister of Finance, Paweł Karbownik. It's an honor for us to have you in. And also Reena Badiani-Magnusson and Nathalie Picarelli, senior economists at the World Bank, they would present their systemic country diagnostic. You know what is the plan of the game. I will invite then the minister to take floor and to address the audience as the first person, the first speaker.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I will speak English because we have guests here who probably better understand English. So thank you for this kind invitation, and it's been many years since I've been here. I had a problem to tell you the truth, but because this is a new building, so I can honestly say I'm the first time here. And I don't have to reveal the decades that passed in the meantime. I don't want to, because I think that the majority of the event is about discussion, so I just briefly touch upon the report and the challenges described here. And unfortunately, I will have to leave in the meantime because I have discussions with the European Commission on the excessive deficit procedure, which is also an important matter. So let me first of all congratulate the team, Nathalie, Reena, and the World Bank for the magnificent report. I've read it, I must say, with great interest, and it touches upon all challenges that I think we are facing in Poland. And I'm not gonna obviously refer to all of them because it wouldn't make sense. But I will focus on two key elements which are important for the government and especially for the Ministry of Finance at the moment, which doesn't mean that the other elements are not important. They are equally important, but it would be way too boring if I went through all the challenges. We know them well. But before going into these two major points, let me just challenge the writers and tell you that I don't think that reaching the last mile of convergence is an ultimate goal. I think convergence is something that doesn't stop. So we will have to converge over time, regardless if we, reach the next stage of convergence. Certainly, we are at this, at the crossroads at the moment, and since we have joined the European Union, we have surpassed many countries when it comes to GDP per capita. Certainly, from the so-called old Europe, we have surpassed Portugal and Greece, and we are reaching the level of Spain. Some even say that we should reach the level of the UK soon, but in the meantime, they've left the EU, so that's another story. So certainly the convergence of the Polish economy is a phenomenon that we have discussed in this economic and academia fora for decades, because obviously since the fall of the Iron Curtain there was a big economic experiment happening in Poland, and we are proud to say that we as Poles, we made quite a successful journey, which we would like to continue, especially in these crucial times. So this brings me to the two challenges I wanted to mention, which are the center focus of the government these days, and they may not be directly related to the finance ministry. I'm not going to talk about EDP because there are too many journalists in the room. But I'm going to talk about the major challenges, and the first major challenge is obviously the energy transition, because it's a phenomenon that is not only important for Poland, it's an issue that is a challenge for all the countries, including the most developed countries, like maybe less so the US, because they find their way through this challenge, but certainly for all the European countries, like Germany, the UK, Italy, France, Spain, and obviously for Poland because of our historical legacy of coal and the reliance on coal, which is on the one hand, it's a challenge, and it's indeed dragging us a little bit into difficult political and economic discussions. But on the other hand, I think we've surpassed a stage where the political discussion was too heated, and now everybody more or less agrees that this needs to be sorted out. The previous government has also sketched out some path towards exiting coal, so I think it's less contentious. Obviously, I mean, it's politically and socially very challenging, and we've discussed with Ari and with colleagues from the World Bank many times how we should design the measures to, for example, address the regions where there will be potentially layoffs and where we have to prepare for reskilling, but also we have to prepare these places for new investments because we have to create jobs there. And this is, I think, a common challenge for all advisors and government officials and academia, how to design these measures so that the transition is not perceived as too shocking, because otherwise it will not happen. And I think this is very clear, that we need to design measures which are smart in a way, because if we do too radical measures that are not well prepared, like we did in Poland with the increase of the retirement age, then politicians come and they revert these reforms and measures, and in the long run it doesn't make sense. So I think this work with the World Bank is crucial, because the bank has a sort of more global approach and less political, and they have lots of global experience, so they can help us design these measures in a more socially acceptable way. And here it wouldn't be I think it's necessary to mention, obviously, the current situation that we have in Poland and the floods and the projects that we've been doing with the World Bank for over 20 years, for which we are obviously very grateful. And we know that we have another project in the pipeline of over 1 billion that will prepare those most affected regions for the next natural disasters, and I think this is also a good example how to make such changes with local society, because this is crucial. But coming back to energy, so certainly the biggest challenge for European economy and for the Polish economy are the costs of energy. We know that we pay for electricity and gas from 2 to 5 times more than the Americans and the Chinese. Which is why it was also mentioned in the recent Draghi report, which is why we have to think as Europeans how to build a real energy market in Europe. And our Prime Minister has suggested such an idea 10 years ago when he proposed the Energy Union. So this is on the European scale. But in Poland, because the report refers to Poland, I wanted to mention energy because I wanted to tell you that indeed the energy transition is at the heart of the economic transition. So basically, if you think about the transition of the economy, at the heart of the whole economic transition is the issue of energy. Not only because of the needs, but also because of the fact that this transition involves a transition into green economy. And the green economy, as we all know, is a global business. So if we make this transition right, if we provide financing for innovative companies, if we create ecosystem for innovation, and this is my second point, and that I will go back to in a few seconds, then we have a chance not only to prepare our economy for decarbonization and to make sure that the prices of energy are lower, and therefore the competitiveness of our companies is strengthened, but we also create new business opportunities for new companies that are benefiting from this global green transition, and they will continue to benefit because this is a business that will be developed over decades. So it's not something that will happen overnight, which is why we have discussed with the World Bank for many months, and we are working on a macroeconomic model also, and thanks to the bank for providing your knowledge. We are working on a macroeconomic model that will help us design this energy transition in a way that allows the Polish economy to benefit from it. Because you can look at it from the perspective of those who are complaining that, oh gosh, we have lost 8 years, you know, it's a disaster, we are so way behind, etc. And it doesn't make sense because, you know, the past is the past. We have to focus on the future. And we have to think how we can use the energy transition to use the new situation we are in. And the situation is that some prices of technology, some technologies have over those years decreased dramatically, which is why we are working with the bank, with the Ministry of Energy and Climate, with some internal think tanks to calibrate the economic transition, the energy transition in a way that we will use this momentum. That was also the case for Poland in the 90s when we had an outdated banking system. We came late to the party, and because of the fact that we were able to use new technologies and new methods in the banking, our banking system became very, very competitive. So that's my first comment. So the energy transition and also the green energy transition is the major challenge, but it's also a major opportunity for our economy. And of course, you know, I don't want to picture the rosy picture because it's not easy. We've been discussing for many months with various ministries, with companies, with stakeholders, also with companies who have coal assets. It's going to be a very challenging process, and in some parts we don't have solutions yet, but we are working on them almost every day because we all know how crucial this process is for the whole energy transition and for the whole economy. But certainly this is the approach that we should, and we do look at it from the angle of not only increasing competitiveness and meeting climate targets, but above all from the point of view that this is a business opportunity and we have to use it. But in order to use this business opportunity, and here I come to my second point, we need an ecosystem for innovation. And obviously, probably those who are a bit older and studied here, we've discussed, you know, innovation in Poland, Polish economy for also 2-3 decades. So it's an old story, but it's never really happened. Which brings me to the point that for us, this ecosystem of innovation is another cornerstone of our economic transition. And this is also what, by the way, Draghi writes about in the broader perspective of European economy and how we are lagging behind the US in the respect of innovation and high tech. So for us, creating the innovative ecosystem that will allow companies from green businesses, but also biotech companies. We have excellent biotech companies in Poland that are very competitive globally. We have excellent defense sector, private companies that are cooperating with defense ministries all over the world, but somehow some of them were not collaborating with the Polish Defense Ministry over the last years, but they have already great experience with the defense ministries in the UK, in Norway, and other countries. So we have also, obviously, maybe AI is probably less developed, but this is another avenue that could be included in this ecosystem of innovation, and which we look at also with the Ministry of Digitalization, so that we use all these companies that are here in Poland, and we provide them with an ecosystem where they can rely on the access to capital and institutions. And this requires capital from pre-seed capital through business angel, venture capital, through until the equity, private equity, and big money, which is Also a structural challenge for not only for the Polish economy, it's being also mentioned in the World Bank report, but certainly this ecosystem of financing innovation and institutions that support innovation, I think this is the second major challenge for our economic transition, and this is something that we are really very much focused on. And we should propose some structural solutions soon as the government. But I just wanted to mention that because, again, this is mentioned in the report. This is a European challenge. And if we are thinking about speeding up our economy, and indeed, I mean, for the past years, we've known that we have relied on consumptions, we don't have enough investments, and above all, innovation is lagging behind. These are the structural challenges that we are addressing, and obviously I hope it will bear fruit in a greater cohesion of regions and also bigger increases in the GDP. So I will leave you with these two thoughts because I think I've already been too long. Sorry for that. And as I said, I will have to leave soon because I have these discussions with the European Commission, but I wish you a great discussions. I leave my co-workers here so that they can learn from all the discussions that you will have, and I wish you a fruitful debates. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister is never too long if Minister of Finance speaking. So now let me thank you very much for this conceptual framework. We've already known the perspective of Minister of Finance, the Polish perspective on the issues to be discussed today. Let me introduce someone who doesn't need an introduction for many of yours. Prorector, Vice Rector for Research, Agnieszka Chłoń-Domińczak. Could you please address the audience, and then we will invite Akhalkatsi also to present the word from the World Bank Group.
Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure and honor to host you here in this particular building. As you could see when you entered the building, it is brand new, so this is actually a opening. We are not officially opened yet here. You still can see some cables here and there, but nevertheless, it is an important investment for us, and I'm extremely happy that this particular event could happen here in this building. So that is really important, but equally important it is that the country Diagnostic is presented here at the Warsaw School of Economics, which shows that it is important that there's a collaboration between research, international organizations and public authorities when we think about the future of Poland, when we think about the future of Europe and the entire world, in thinking how, given the challenges that we are facing, some of them are global, such as population aging, which is close to my heart, but also digitalization, crises that affect us all the time, climate change that we are currently very deeply suffering, especially in the southwest of Poland. And thanks to some of the World Bank investments and projects, the losses are not as high as they could have been. So we see that it is really important to think about future, to think about how to catch up, how to make this last mile of convergence, and we hope that this collaboration between research, public administration, international institutions, again, is a way to really take us forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Rector Chłoń-Domińczak. I will invite Akhalkatsi to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm really honored to be here together with my team and our key counterparts in Poland from the government, from academia, from across the society to present this kind of systematic country diagnostic. And so we are basically launching this building together with our diagnostic, and I'm really thankful to Warsaw School of Economics for hosting us here today. For me personally, I came here right before the transition happened as a first-year student from Tbilisi State University, and the transformation that Poland has done over the past 3 decades is just mind-blowing. It's a mind-blowing, and as Minister Karbownik mentioned, that convergence is a process, is an ongoing process, and there will not be a stop for Poland. However, I think what do we need convergence for, correct? So that's the question that we are trying also to address through our engagement in Poland. Convergence for the benefit of people, convergence that can translate for equal opportunities for all, convergence that can then inspire and bring examples of how things can be done to other countries in the region and in other parts of the world. So we really hope that the last mile of convergence with EU average standards will be a great example for those countries who will be doing first mile of convergence from middle income status to high income status. And indeed, I think this innovation that Poland has offered and is still trying to advance is something that we are all learning from. We are very lucky as World Bank Group to be able to be part of the journey. We hope that we will continue on this part. And this systematic country diagnostic tries to take a stock on where do we see some of the potential constraints that the Polish economy may have on this convergence path, but also what are the opportunities? What are the opportunities for Polish economy and Polish people that maybe together we can all think about? So systematic country diagnostic, we ourselves will be using to lay out our next phase of engagement, identify where World Bank Group can prioritize, what are the sectors. But most importantly, we hope that this diagnostic will be used by Polish authorities as they are defining their medium-term strategy, by think tanks, by wider society in order to prioritize things that matter today. Minister Karbownik mentioned 2 areas, and I want to maybe also comment on energy transition. Indeed, without Poland decarbonizing at the right pace, the ambition of the Green Deal will not probably happen. So what we all need to focus here is how to do it. And in addition to our systematic country diagnostic, in the early November, we will be launching another report that we have been developing together with the authorities and wider society. It's called Climate Development, Country Climate and Development Report. We call it CCDR. That one looks at what are the opportunities, what are different scenarios, what are different paths that Poland can do in order to grow and grow green. And good news is that this is within the reach, this is possible. However, again, there will be a need to undertake pretty significant transitions. And I think the social factor, the just transition that Minister Karbownik also referred to, will be an important. How do we do it so that people are protected, benefit, and that we gain the most out of this opportunity that the energy transition, the digital transitions present. Our team will present, of course, the main findings of the SCD. But what I wanted to also say is that we all live in a very difficult times. There are challenges, geopolitical challenges, energy transition needs. Technology represents both opportunity, but as well as important. And we live in societies that age. So another important demographic challenges that we are all facing. Now, in this context, I think the way we all think about future development is extremely important. And I would say that keeping Poland competitive is something that we all need to focus our attention on. The role that private sector will play, solutions on how to incentivize investments, innovative investments will be key. As a World Bank Group, when I mention World Bank Group, we have our public sector arm, but we also have International Finance Corporation that is very active in Poland, and Ari represents our entire World Bank Group here. So this is an opportunity for us to think about solutions that span public, private, and involve the entire society. So again, I think let me thank again Warsaw School of Economics for allowing us this platform. I also want to thank Minister Karbownik for excellent collaboration that we have with the authorities. I hope that the World Bank can continue to accompany Poland in these difficult times. The recent floods, they were just one reminder of vulnerabilities that countries face in this part, and not just in our region. Of course, for us, it's rewarding to see that some of our work is helping communities, is helping to save lives. But the question is what it is that we can be doing going forward that can build this resilience, that can allow communities to feel safe, communities to have access to all the services, to all the innovation, and all the bright future that this country has. We are looking at Poland as the beacon of innovation, as the example for other countries that the World Bank works with, and I really hope that our last mile will be a continuous first mile example for countries in Eastern Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anna. Now let us move to the presentation itself. The presentation of the SCD will be made by one of the co-authors, Reena Badiani-Magnusson. However, another co-author, Nathalie Picarelli, is also here to answer all your questions later on. Reena, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So we've divided up where I will present and Nathalie will answer all of the difficult questions. Thank you very much. I'm excited to sit here today to present the World Bank's latest analysis on Poland's economic, social and environmental progress, and we focus on how Poland complete its convergence with the EU. Now, I appreciate a good challenge, and I think the challenge from the minister was correct. It's not about EU averages necessarily. We see that Poland is poised to move beyond this last mile, to move towards the EU 15. And so one of the perspectives we come to is what's next. So let's start with what an SCD update is, because you may not be familiar with this. This is a major analytical diagnostic report of the World Bank Group. It is a 360, so it includes all of our sectors, going from our macro trade and investment team to our water and agriculture. It's independent, and it's based on existing data and analysis that we have. And we've consulted quite extensively on this, and I see many familiar faces in the room. Thank you for your perspectives during the course of the work. It identifies a set of constraints and priorities for sustainable reduction in poverty and increases in shared prosperity on a livable planet. And as signaled, it informs our strategic engagement of the World Bank Group with Poland. It's one of our core diagnostics, but it's not the only one. We also have our country climate and development report, our country economic memorandum, and public finance review. So we have multiple analyses that feed into our country partnership frameworks. So what I'll present to you today is first starting with where does Poland stand today and what emerging trends we see that shape its outcomes. And many of these were touched upon in the opening remarks by various people. So let's start today. Poland's economic development story to date is clearly one of success, and it's a prominent example of Poland's convergence machine. What we've seen over the last 3 decades is that Poland has transformed itself into a more modern market economy. It's joined the EU, it's attracted foreign investment, and it's sustained robust growth. Today, what we see is that income per capita has reached 80% of the EU average. This is a remarkable jump from the 48% it was in 2000 and the 70% that we had in 2017. We've seen that the economy has proven to be resilient and it sustained robust income growth of 4.3% between 2017 and 2022, which has exceeded its peers, and it's been a full 1 percentage point higher than that recorded in 2011 to 2016, which is the period of our previous systematic country diagnostic. This income growth translated into median incomes, which grew by 2% a year over this same period. What we've seen is that Poland's human capital has been central to the sustained long-term growth, and it's been a key factor for attracting foreign direct investment and enabling economic diversification. Today, we see that 1/3 of jobs in Poland are linked to exports, and which reflects both the country's global and regional reach and its ability to translate this foreign direct investment into high-quality jobs. What we've seen from our productivity analysis is that growth accelerated through to 2019, thanks to improvements in firm-level efficiency, translating basically into key innovations, managerial capacities, and more efficient technologies translate into productivity growth. However, what we also see is that there's less progress, if you want, on allocating resources between less productive firms and more productive firms. So we see an allocative efficiency issue, and this has weighed on growth. Now, what we've seen, of course, is this post-transition labor and capital-driven development model. It served Poland well. Clearly, the last 30 years have been one of success. But what we see is that the model is environmentally unsustainable, and it's reaching its limits, which requires a policy focus to basically move towards different growth engines to support regionally balanced as well as sustainable growth. This was one of the key messages that I heard from the minister, who flagged the energy transition will be the heart of Poland's next stage. It's needed to raise competitiveness, but it's also clearly going to be a growth engine for tapping into new regional value chains and global value chains. What we also, on the right-hand side of this chart, let me check it's left, right, that's right. I'm not a great driver, as you can tell. What we also see is that Poland is poised to reach further in its convergence process. And we agree very much with the statement of the minister in his opening remarks. When you see on this chart is that you see that Poland has reached 80% of the EU 27 average, but it's still at 1/3 of the EU 15 average. And so what we see is that Poland is ready to move beyond the EU average, but also to go towards the higher level, if you want, of incomes in the region. This last period, however, has been difficult. Poland has been tested by global and regional shocks, and it's going to face multiple headwinds in coming years that require resetting the growth model and call for stronger institutions to help navigate the simultaneous transitions that are underway. We start, of course, with the COVID pandemic at the turn of the decade, which caused Poland to experience its first economic contraction since 1991. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in early 2022 generated an energy crisis, high inflation, and monetary policy tightening around the world that increased borrowing costs. While the economy has proved to be resilient to these shocks, we see that policy buffers have diminished, and the minister touched upon these when discussing the excessive deficit procedure. Fiscal space is considerably narrowed, with large structural deficits at a time of tighter financing conditions. And we see that spending pressures are mounting, in particular in the area of defense, where we've seen a doubling of spending as a share of GDP in the last decade, and in the area of health, where aging-related costs will only expand. On the social side, we see that poverty reduction has moderated, and resilience has been undercut with the real value of social benefits having deteriorated over time. National extreme poverty measures rose considerably in 2023, and they've now reached their highest levels since 2015, despite the deployment of generous measures to cushion the impacts of these shocks. Inequality has risen over the longer term, in a manner that is underestimated in household surveys, but is increasingly visible in administrative data. And recent energy security concerns in the region have underlined the need for advancing on the low-carbon pathway, which can also raise the competitiveness of the economy. Finally, but not least, the deterioration in the quality of core governance institutions in recent years has weighed on growth, inclusion, and sustainability. Strengthening these core institutions at both the national and the subnational level, as well as rebuilding trust, it's going to be vital in order to be able to navigate these multiple transitions when consensus and societal pivots will be needed to address the challenges of our time. So we see multiple structural challenges facing Poland in the next 5 to 10 years. First, in this last mile of convergence, or in this next mile of convergence perhaps, Poland needs to shift away from its carbon-intensive growth model, which means readying firms as well as the labor force for the transitions. Further investments are clearly going to be needed to reduce the impact of climate shocks, as well as to bolster population resilience. Secondly, and this is a broader global constraint, we see that global productivity is weighing on growth. This is linked to factors such as slower growth of the working age population more broadly, stabilization of educational attainment, and intensifying climate shocks. And since the pandemic, it's been very clear we've seen a noticeable shift in global as well as regional value chains, along with higher trade barriers due to international trade tensions. This has the potential to impact technology transfer. While these changes, of course, present certain risks, they open new opportunities for Poland, particularly when we consider the strength of the country's existing manufacturing base, as well as its comparative strength in several products. Third, rapid technological change, including from the green transition, is altering production methods and the demand for skills. We touched upon AI this morning, which has been particularly raging, the discussion has been raging since the release of ChatGPT. But shifts in labor productivity and demand, this has been happening over the course of 2 decades as a result of technological change. And we see that more changes are expected. None of us have a crystal ball to anticipate what will come, but what we know is that what will come in the future will be different from what we have today. And so facing these challenges will require supporting labor market resilience and foundational skills in order to allow the workforce to continue to evolve. Fourth, and perhaps I should have started with it since it is one of the most pressing issues, rapid demographic transition and population aging represent important headwinds that are expected to weigh both on the country's long-term growth prospects as well as on fiscal sustainability. Businesses already express serious concerns about labor shortages, and the shrinking workforce is going to be a key challenge in coming years. In a long-term growth model, we anticipate that the aging population will reduce potential growth by 0.6 percentage points by a year in 2040, exerting a considerable drag on growth. While there's space to increase labor force participation, and we'll get to that, what we see as a focus will also be needed to be placed on labor productivity, which still stands at 65% of the EU average, one of the lower in the range. And like other structural challenges, what we see is that aging is going to be impacting regions quite differently. It'll be impacting gminas quite differently. And so this will be require result in uneven strains on these public services. Fifth, and I think it's less of a structural challenge as much of an opportunity, we see the evolving EU with Poland's central role in it. Poland's presidency of the EU in 2025, it's coming at a pivotal moment for the bloc, at a moment when the bloc is facing some of its hardest challenges to date, with war at its external borders and an enlargement process that is moving at an accelerated momentum. As the EU upgrades its institutions and convergence policies in order to ready itself for these transitions, Poland has a unique opportunity to exert its vision on this future direction. So, what are the key opportunities that we see ahead for Poland in this last and next mile of convergence? That's the question that's asked in this SCD. So in our analysis, we put forward 4 key areas that we call high-level outcomes, which we consider to be pivotal for improving inclusive and sustainable growth. And alongside these, we have 12 priorities in each of these areas. Now, as the minister opened this morning, if we were to go through all of these areas, I think it would be a very long presentation. So I'll be focusing on a few select areas. Of course, if you look at the report, you'll see that we have analysis that cuts across these dimensions. In terms of the four high-level outcomes, we're focusing on productivity and jobs, human capital, high-quality public services, and strengthening the social contract, and of course, the green transition. So let's turn to this first area, which focuses on productivity and jobs. First, when we look at capital, Poland's capital to output ratio still lags considerably behind its aspirational peers. And when we look at private investment as a share of GDP, what we see is that the country ranks at the bottom, towards the bottom 25th percentile in the distribution of the EU. What this highlights is the need for growing investment and greater investment to close these gaps. We estimate that reforms to boost private investment towards the EU median could increase GDP per capita growth by about 0.5 percentage point, which would annually until 2015. What this would do would be to considerably offset the impact of the shrinking workforce, making it a key strategy for long-term economic prospects. But what we also see is the need to create a more attractive environment for private investors. And what you'll see throughout my presentation is the theme of institutions, and I'll come back to that at the end. We think it's essential to tackle issues like policy uncertainty and reduce the regulatory burden on firms. By streamlining policies and their implementation, this will build confidence and encourage a robust private sector in the long run. To drive growth, we see that we need to not only focus on increasing investment, but also on directing more capital into high productivity sectors like ICT and intangible assets. By this, and we're very much aligned in our views on this, I mean prioritizing research, development, and innovation to generate valuable intellectual property and spur long-term economic gains. From our analysis historically, what we've seen is that half of the investments have gone into buildings and infrastructure in Poland, while investment in intangible assets accounted for less than 10%. As Draghi's report highlights, intangible capital has been a key source of growth in the US, where investment in these assets has basically outpaced that of investment in tangible capital. However, in the EU, you see that the opposite trend has occurred, with more focus on physical assets over these intangibles. In Poland, what we see is that public R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP has stagnated below the EU average, and it's fed into this weak quality of public science output as captured by scientific publications. We see that science-business linkages remain weak and have limited the uptake of research output into the economy. However, there are many promising branches that are already there: biotech, defense, nascent AI, and we see that initiatives to connect researchers with companies show great potential. But what we also note is that their true impact relies on having this supportive ecosystem in place, which the minister flagged this morning. This includes securing funding for new technologies and ensuring that infrastructure is there to bring products to market. We've been working across a number of EU countries now in understanding these linkages between science and companies, and we see that a lot of this also is in the design. So alongside this, the funding, this ecosystem needs to actually be fit for purpose. Alongside investing in R&D, we also see significant scope for technology adoption to advance productivity. And despite progress in digitalization, Poland still ranks at the bottom of metrics that capture technology adoption across both the EU and the OECD. We recently conducted a technology adoption survey, which allows us to basically look within general business functions and specific business functions, whether firms are both adopting technology and also using the technology that they've put in place. What surprised us is that a greater share of companies in Poland have access to sophisticated technology compared to Korea. But what we also see is that they've adopted technology, but they're not using it intensively. And I noticed that the bars of you can't see in this chart on the left what the green and the red implies. So the green implies that the company has adopted the technology, but the red gives you the intensive margin as to whether they're actually using it. So when you see that the red line is within the green, it effectively means we've put in place the system, but within our company, we're not using it as intensively as we should. And the next chart on the right in the middle shows the firm level, what happens when you look at the leading firms versus the lagging firms. So what you see is that even amongst leading firms, they're adopting technology and using it intensively for certain processes, in this case, business administration and planning, but not holistically, not across all business functions. And as you see, when you look at the bottom 10% of firms, the situation is much worse. So technology upgrade solutions are readily available and not excessively costly. and they have demonstrable impacts on firm productivity. We did an analysis say what would happen if you move the bottom 25% of firms and you move them towards the middle. Now, in real terms, this is not a quantum leap. This involves adopting online banking as a primary method of payment, using computer software for all administrative and planning processes. So this is something that was within very much reach of the technologies we have today. What we see is that effectively Poland has a number of support tools available to facilitate technology adoption, but firms don't always know what to ask for. They don't know what they don't know. And so what we need to do to help enterprises to understand both their gaps and the returns from adopting these technologies. And one thought we've had is how to incorporate mandatory need assessments into the support tools on offer, and also to strengthen the digital innovation hubs, the future industry platform, the other business support institutions, which could enhance the ability to drive innovation. Alongside these measures to advance firm productivity, as I mentioned earlier, we see distortions in competition in Poland that's effectively affecting the reallocation of production factors across firms. In other words, old, inefficient companies, they're not being outcompeted by the newer, more productive firms, signaling that we have market barriers and inefficiencies that impede competition forces from doing their jobs. We also see a series of opportunities for boosting market competition. These include reducing restrictive regulations in professional services, limiting the state's presence in competitive sectors to prevent market distortions, tackling the bureaucratic and financial obstacles that are holding back the smaller and more innovative firms from growing. So a range of options to support both productivity within firm productivity as well as across. Finally, and this is very much related to a point mentioned by the Deputy Minister, we see potential for capital market deepening to strengthen investment in innovative sectors and finance long-term investments. Polish banks have been a cornerstone of the country's economic expansion, and they've played a crucial role in the last 30 years. Poland's banking sector is one of the largest and most robust in Central and Eastern Europe, and it continues to drive financial stability and development. We have to recognize this role. What we also see, however, is that there's room for greater diversity. Bank loans are still very much the preferred and sometimes the only funding option for companies, and they account for 80% of external financing. While access to finance in Poland remains strong overall, we see some gaps as well that need addressing. But however, the broader question is how to reduce the reliance on bank funding and support a more developed capital market. Poland may have one of the largest non-government capital markets in the EU, in the Central Eastern Europe countries, but it's still undersized relative to the country's development potential and needs. And this is particularly with respect to green transition that requires a longer-term financing window. Poland's venture capital market is also slowly expanding, but it still remains too weak to fully support the commercialization of innovation. When I spoke about gaps, what we see is the gaps with respect to access to finance are particularly there for MSMEs, who have amongst the lowest share of bank loans regionally. So broadly, to strengthen the financial landscape, what we see is there's a need to expand the range of available financial instruments and also to diversify market participants. We need to build capacity across capital market shareholders and foster access to these long-term financing streams, which would allow for investments such as related to the green economy to foster. We also clearly see the need for more venture capital, whether it goes from seed, startup, and growth, and that we see that this is going to be key. For large enterprises, we think that incentivizing the issuance of corporate bonds is critical, whilst for micro and small enterprises, we see a need to promote instruments like factoring, invoicing, and leasing. And additionally, legal solutions can be useful to ease payment delays. So I've mentioned long-term financing. Let's now turn to opportunities in this area that needs the most long-term finance, which is the green transition. Despite a significant decline in carbon intensity since the early 2000s, Poland's heavy dependence on coal makes it one of the most energy-efficient economies in the EU. This, along with high and rising energy prices, which we've seen recently, really raise competitiveness challenges for the future. Over the remainder of the decade, there's likely to be, we need a concerted focus on the green transition and energy security, which is pivotal given Poland's commitments under the EU set out in the European Green Deal. But importantly, what we see is that this is not just an external commitment. This is necessary, as the minister clearly outlined. This is necessary for Poland's competitiveness. What we see is that the ambitious development decarbonization targets can strengthen Poland's competitiveness and could reap benefits that come from these first mover advantages in green technologies within global and European value chains. Poland can build off its existing manufacturing capabilities and competitive strengths in several green products. But this faster decarbonization, it requires substantial investment in the ailing and underinvested power grid in order to enable mass renewable deployment by both the public and the private sector. And what we see is that in the renewable energy sector, we see that there are several overlapping barriers. This includes spatial planning restrictions, the need to streamline grid connection processes, and we also see lengthy bureaucratic and administrative processes. So taking the example of wind and solar, what we see is that wind and solar permitting time exceeds that of the EU limits. For wind, the permitting time is more than 80 months, while for solar, it is on average 20 months. What we also see is that the need to create a more predictable policy environment, giving investors confidence that they need for these longer-term commitments. We also see that decarbonization of the building sector can create further co-benefits. And this is a space where we've been supporting Poland in the single-family building to support the heat source transition of this segment. But this segment highlights just how difficult it is to bring coordinated institutions from the local, national, and government and the regional level together, along with the capacity needed by the local governments to monitor and enforce regulations that are set across holistically. Moving now to how to support societal inclusion, what we see, of course, is that Poland's strong education system has been the foundation of its economic model, since its skilled workforce have attracted foreign direct investment and enhanced social mobility. But despite this amazing and impressive stellar performance in the past, and this you can see in the chart on the left, you see that Poland is effectively at the top of most indicators and at the bottom of others. But this is the performance of the past. We see a decline in the quality of basic education that's visible since 2016, which places an urgency on reforms to advance learning outcomes, social mobility, as well as long-term growth. Using the PISA score, which is the Program for International Student Assessment, we see scores have deteriorated considerably between 2018 and 2022, reflected learning losses not just from the pandemic, but also from reforms to the education system since 2016, which are likely to have had a negative impact both on the acquisition of foundational skills as well as on the equity. So in the chart in the middle, you see that children from poorer households were some of those that were most affected by these reforms, which pushed forward by a year the tracking of moving into vocational training. And it's these kids that are most likely to be channeled into this route. We see also that the post-reform education system in Poland has some of the lowest hours of instruction during full-time compulsory education in the EU. So this is really a remarkable statistic. And when you look across the OECD, that number, effectively that gap grows, when you see that Korea and Japan are effectively investing significantly more hours of instruction. We also see, and this is an interesting perspective, education is also an area where the demographic transition is there at full force. It affects not just the base, which is the number of students, it affects where they're located, which is increasingly in urban areas. But of course, what we see is that 40% of primary school teachers are within 10 years or so of retirement. So it affects the workforce considerably. We see that there are significant opportunities to advance foundational skills, including through extending the hours of learning, as well as through monitoring mechanisms that allow for responsive engagement to support some of these children that are left behind. Secondly, for sharing prosperity, we see the need to increase labor force participation and resilience. This is going to be important not just for social inclusion, but also for economic growth. Poland's vibrant labor market has been clearly a powerful force for increasing household incomes, with rising labor force participation and strong wage growth feeding into long-term reductions in poverty. But the last decade has been remarkable. Few other countries have seen the type of labor force participation growth that Poland has seen, from 63% of 20 to 64-year-olds in 2011 to 77% in 2021. This labor force participation needs to be continued with a focus on women and older workers. What we see for women is that effectively limited and uneven access to childcare and elderly care diminishes incentives to work, which stem from the joint tax filing system, Also, what we also see is that there's highly unequal parental leave take-up. I tried to put a box around Poland in this picture, but it was hard because when you look at male take-up of parental leave, there is no box to put around. It's too limited. And so this is partly a reflection of societal norms, but also of unequal allowances. While there's been a steady increase in employment rates amongst those who are age 50 and above, and that's been driving these increases in labor force participation that I described, what we see is that effectively the legal retirement age acts as an important metric for when employment reduces, despite provisions in place to increase the effective retirement age. And at a time when life expectancies are increasing, this underutilization of human capital, and I think we have to consider it in this way, this is human capital, the experience that embodied in these individuals, it's becoming a pressing concern that eventually will feed into pension contribution gaps, it feeds into gender gaps in pensions and into elderly poverty. As such, we see that an urgent need to extend this, this period of effective retirement. We also see that changing labor markets are going to pose this issue of labor market scarring. When we discussed at the beginning the rapid technological change, what we see is a need to strengthen labor market resilience, which includes facilitating lifelong learning and encouraging firms and employers to do the same. Finally, population resilience has been really reduced by the reduction in adequacy and coverage of Poland's minimum income programs. What you see in the chart on the left is that the share of households supported by these programs has declined systematically over the course of a decade and a half, from 9% of the population to about 3.4% today. What this means is that the share of households that are being supported in times of shock has effectively diminished, and it's readily translated into the rise in the national extreme poverty rate that I presented, I think, on the third or fourth slide. What it also means is that it makes it harder to address some of these other transitions, because when you have minimum income programs that only go to the bottom 3 to 4%, when you want to have programs that address energy poverty or support labor market resilience, you're unable to capture some of these populations. And what we've seen is that the lack of social programs has resulted in untargeted and quite often fiscally expensive forms of support, particularly during this period of energy price shocks. What we also see is that the social and financial sustainability of Poland's pension system will be tested in coming years with raising life expectancy rates. And this is one of the key risks that we see for poverty, and in particular elderly poverty in the future. In the absence of longer working lives with rising life expectancy, the adequacy of pensions is going to continue to adjust downwards, as we've seen already since 2008. While the introduction of the 13th and 14th month pension aims to mitigate some of these trends, this comes obviously at a fiscal cost, with an increased average old age pension spending by 1.1% of GDP. We see that the benefits from voluntary saving schemes are simply insufficient to compensate for the loss of old age income. And part of this is that only a quarter of those individuals are covered by social insurance, have additional pension savings, and trust in private savings institutions remains low, suppressing further investments. So we see that Poland would benefit from further increases in the effective retirement age, and would also need to build strong pensions institutions and instruments to encourage these long-term savings, particularly among younger groups who have the ability to invest. Now, this is my final substantive slide. But what I want to say here is last, but it's definitely not least. And I hope that you saw the thread of institutions meandering through the presentation. Central to all of the opportunities we've discussed today are strong institutions that need to manage and deliver on the key transitions that are underway. As I mentioned at the start, but I didn't show you, a decline in the quality of core governance institutions in recent years has weighed on growth, inclusion, and sustainability. And you see in this figure on the world governance indicators, on the top you see the deterioration of multiple indicators between 2010 and 2021. And on the bottom you see the gap between the EU average in 2021 and Poland's indicators in the same year. What we see is that Poland needs to advance coordination and administrative capacity to design and enable the reforms that we've discussed in the last 20-25 minutes. And without these institutions, ultimately, this course will be much more challenging. In our assessment, we've described multiple opportunities for institutional strengthening, But what we see tangibly is that it cuts across multiple areas. So in all of these areas, ranging from voice and accountability to regulatory quality, we see opportunities to go further. For example, in the space, we have areas that cut across the two. So across voice and accountability and regulatory quality, we see that the period of announcing a legal act and it entering into force declined from 53 days in 2011 to 31 in 2022. So what this fast tracking does is, of course, it not only weakens the business environment by generating uncertainty and it limits the time that companies have to prepare for changes in law, but what we see also, of course, is that the consultative process is cut away. So taking a more consultative process with broader scope for longer duration both enhances this social cohesion and consensus, but it also improves the quality of lawmaking, ultimately leading to a stronger business environment. With that, let me turn back to our 12 priorities, which I did not go through all of them. I hope that you have a chance to read the report and to see the depth of analysis that we have presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reena. Let me take this opportunity also to welcome Ines Rocha, our Regional Director of the International Finance Corporation for Europe, who will later deliver closing remarks. However, first, we will move on to our discussion panel. So let me invite our distinguished panelists, starting with the moderator, Jasmine Shakeri, the World Bank Practice Manager in the Macroeconomic Trade and Investment Practice. We will be split in twine to so that we can see you better. Next, Ms. Jolanta Jaworska from IBM and Employers Association Leviathan. Mr. Paweł Śliwowski from the Polish Economic Institute, the Deputy Director and Acting Director. Our gracious host here, Vice Rector Agnieszka Chłoń-Domińczak, Vice Rector for Science. And last but not least, Ari Naim, the country manager for Poland, World Bank, of course. So, Jasmine, the floor is yours, and I will also distribute the mics.
Great, thank you very much, Christoph. It's a pleasure to be here, and we just had heard about the main findings of the SCD report. The Deputy Minister also gave a very nice introduction, I think, for this panel discussion. Let me start with a question for Ari. We heard from the Deputy Minister and also in the slides that Poland is one of the most emissions-intensive economies in the EU. And so the energy transition and decarbonization is one of the top priorities for the country. Also, not only because it has to be done, but also for the competitiveness of the economy. Ari, my question for you is, we've seen increased activity on the IFC side in investments in climate-related areas. What is the next frontier in that area for IFC in this space, as you see it, and including in Poland?
Thank you, and really great to be here in this building for the first time, as has been pointed out. So you are right that the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, the International Finance Corporation, has made the green transition a priority in Poland. Not, I would say, not just a mere green transition, but what I would call green innovation. In a country like Poland, IFC strategy is not to be another banker. Our strategy instead is really to catalyze innovation, to make projects bankable that would not be bankable without our support. And third, I would say to ensure not that we bank all the green transition projects because we are a drop in the water in the context of the investments that are needed for the green transition, but rather that we support a local commercial financial sector and the local capital markets that are able to finance the green transition. So what does that need concretely is like that we work both on the green innovation front and on the climate finance front. So to give you examples, we are looking at projects that we consider innovation that really only a country like Poland can implement in our portfolio of member countries. I would say, of course, offshore winds come to mind. And for instance, in offshore wind, for the project to be bankable, they have to be best practice when it comes to engagement with fishermen communities, environment protection, and of course, technologies. Another example is on hydrogen generation, where we are piloting a few projects with companies like Polenergia, where these projects would not be bankable without an institution such as IFC co-developing the investment until they reach the bankability stage. Another example would be battery storage, would be the circular economy, industrial decarbonization of hard-to-abate industries. That's on the kind of innovation side. On the financial sector side, really, I mean, of course, Poland has a very strong and resilient banking sector and financial sector overall. But when I hope that in a couple of weeks, we will disclose the preliminary findings of the country climate and development reports, and we will see that the investments that are needed, that are also, by the way, the estimate of the government in the context of the new energy strategy, are extremely significant from now to 2050. We are talking about several hundred billions of euros of investment needed to ensure this green transition and this net zero pathway. So what can we do to ensure that the banking sector that is resilient has the capacity? I mean, taking risks alongside with, for instance, risk-sharing facilities that target specific type of green investment, releasing capital in the financial sector that is stranded on existing asset or on non-performing asset by and releasing this capital in a way that a bit leads to a use of proceeds that is towards green investment, deepening equity in the capital market. So a number of investments that you have seen IFC doing in the past couple of years fit perfectly this kind of initiatives.
Thank you very much, Ari. You mentioned already innovation in the context of the decarbonization, and we heard quite a bit about the need for a country like Poland to innovate in order to stay competitive and keep converging. Let me turn to Jolanta as a representative of the ICT industry here in Poland and in the region. Where, in your experience, do the entrepreneurs in this area see the main barriers to invest? You know, keeping in mind innovation, technology adoption, digitalization more broadly, and making these as the drivers of growth in Poland.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to these discussions. I was looking at the presentation and reading the report, and I was smiling to myself because actually some of the points that you have mentioned here, the findings, are absolutely what we see and feel in Poland. One of the points that was mentioned here was about the fact that majority of the companies who are in this sector in Poland, they are exporting. they are not providing their services, and they are not building their products for the local market. And this is the big challenge. Why? There was also one point at the very bottom of this presentation. In many countries, you see the public adoption of the innovation, public adoption of the innovation and close collaboration with the business. What many of companies, especially in ICT, are observing over the years, and doesn't matter which political option, that there is a lot of in-house developments by the government, which obviously is blocking the adoption, and it's also limiting the market. Because if the companies, and I don't have to explain it to you, but it is obvious, if companies doesn't see the local market demands, and the biggest demand, of course, can come from the public sector, then they are looking for the opportunities abroad. And the question is, why do we have to be here, where we can be, especially if it comes to services? So that's one of our observation. But also when we see, when we observed how the Polish, especially the small companies, what is their approach to innovation and why they have problems with the adoption? Well, it's simple, so human, a fear. The fact that many of the leaders, owners of these companies, they simply do not understand the complexity which is behind the new technology, and this is also the challenge. The challenge is also on the side of IT companies, which many times cannot explain in the simple way what are the benefits that are coming from the adoption of the new technology. The other area, which was also very well visible in your report, it's the skills, the lack of skills, or lack of skills. I would say also the quality of education. And yeah, this is the big challenge. We see it. You could hear the voice of business since, I don't know, many years, more than 15 for sure, when we are talking to and asking for close collaboration with the business. You know, we as a business, we can help, we can support, but the job is so big, then it's not possible to put this on the shoulders of business. And there was one more point which was also mentioned in your report about the silos and lack of collaboration between research and development and private business, especially the state research and development. That's the fact. Unfortunately, we don't have, I would say, a leading research institution in Poland. There is the Łukasiewicz institution, and honestly, and now I'm saying as Jolanta Jaworska, not as representative of any of the organizations that I'm working on, I had a big hopes that maybe this institution will support and with the governance, with the collaboration between different smaller scientific institutions. But honestly, this didn't happen, but I still hope that it can be a Polish Fraunhofer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolanta. So let me turn to Paweł now. We know that in many ways Poland has been a success story, and we saw this on the convergence, relatively rapid convergence with the more developed countries of the EU. But there are multiple challenges ahead, as we discussed in the presentation, from the green transition, the demographic transition, reduced fiscal space also. The Deputy Minister talked about the excessive deficit procedure, for example. So we see multiple challenges globally, regionally, affecting Poland. Where, in this context, do you see the Polish economic model going? And what do you think will allow the economy to make these adjustments and change course? And what are some of the obstacles that you see?
Thank you very much for the invitation and this interesting presentation, as well as the report. Many of the factors have already been mentioned in your report, in the presentation. I will not be repeating them because they are just and quite well laid out. In my view, the biggest challenge right now is the changing paradigm of how we want to develop the economy and the country. Because, frankly speaking, convergence was simple, maybe not easy, but was simple. When we moved out from the communist regime, there were numerous potentials that we could tap on. There were easy gains or low-hanging fruits, and that we cannot rely on them anymore. There will be no the second educational boost. The scholarization levels will not grow as they were growing. We know about all the problems with demography. We were catching up in technology and industry development. This will not happen at the pace we observed because we are slowly moving out from the converging country to a developed country. We already are a developed country. So right now the sources of success are changing, and we all complain that we were spending too little on research and development in recent years, but this was the let's say, pragmatic strategy. If you are a catching up economy, you get better results by following the innovators rather than trying to innovate. Right now we have to switch this paradigm and start to thinking about how we can adjust to the changing economy in a new way. So, and what's the biggest challenge is that right now our economic model has to adapt to the more capital expensive investment. So our industrial base, if you would like to develop it, to make our industry more green, clean, technology-oriented, and adopting all these changes, for example, which Draghi laid out in his report, we need two things. We need much more capital, and we need much more knowledge injection into economy. And both of these sources are not easy for the country which is converging but not yet rich. So the biggest challenge right now is to develop this new paradigm and to compile the set of policies that are suitable to implement this. So we, of course, could rely on the emergence and emerging mechanisms that we just, for example, the state will be just the facilitator. We will catch up with some of these remaining things that we have to do. But what we observe throughout the world is that countries are not only facilitators right now. Some people claim we are returning to the golden era of mercantilism, trade policies, industrial policies, all which we already seen in the Draghi report. So we have to answer what industrial policy for Poland, what trade policy for Poland, provided that we are already in the European Union and we have some other obligations. We cannot act like United States or China. We have to coordinate some of our actions within the European Union. So these are the biggest challenges. What are the biggest assets? First of all, we have a very diversified economy. This helped us during the pandemics, and this will help us probably during the next decade or so in adapting to these new economic challenges. If you look at the measures of, for example, trade concentration, we have one of the lowest trade concentration indicator in the European Union. So our export is quite diversified, but it is middle or low tech predominantly. So this is the problem. So we have to move up on the level on this ladder of global value chains. So I think to sum up that we should seek to develop our new industrial strategy, our new economic strategy. We should start to forget about convergence and to find new ways of developing more advanced solutions. And this is exactly the problem we already speak about before. Right now, in many areas, there is no clear business case for the investment. There is no clear business case to change because companies are faring maybe not perfect, but quite well. There is a large developed export base. Also, internal market is quite big. So why we need the country and the active economic policies? Country have to stood up, the government have to stood up and show, okay, this is not giving you immediate gains, this is risky, so we have to inject blended finance, we have to inject all these innovative policies that attract capital. And that's why I think that the future is a much more active role of the government, much more, let's say, smart. This is the buzzword, but the smart policies. And combining all of that, I think we can move from thinking about convergence and start thinking about the faster and more technological advanced development.
Thank you very much, Paweł. I think a lot of countries will be watching what Poland will do in terms of the new economic growth model. It's always been, I think, very much a model for many other middle-income countries. Let me turn to Agnieszka. Thanks again for having us here. The SCD slides we showed earlier talked about the social protection system and how fragmented it is and how it's really become somewhat inadequate in the face of multiple shocks. In the sense that it cannot no longer really protect vulnerable populations in these situations. What are your views of the main challenges in the social protection system, especially in this context of the evolving needs, also in the context of energy poverty, for example, the energy transition, and of course the continued labor market evolution with demographic change and so on?
Yes, thank you very much. Before I turn to the question, I wanted to say that in that investment in research and development is really important. Unfortunately, in this year's, in the next year's state budget, the expenditure for higher education and research is one of the lowest. So we spend the highest amount ever on the military, and obviously in the time of the conflict, probably it is justified. But on the other hand, research and development suffers. So I think it is important to mention that there are always short-term priorities and long-term priorities, and unfortunately short-term priorities are very frequently against the long-term needs and goals, and this is one of the most difficult challenges that we have in shaping public policies, also in the case of social protection. So when I think about the challenges in the social protection, demographics is one of the most important challenge. Indeed, we have population aging, as Reena mentioned, and it was presented in the slide. We have a huge human capital which is underutilized because of the relatively early transition to retirement, especially of women, but also some potential gains when we look at the labor force participation of women in the childbearing age and also in the age of bringing up children. Also within the investment in education system and skills development, especially in the context of the green transition. Our analysis showed that if we keep the current structure of social protection expenditure, very soon we may face the situation when social protection expenditure is actually exceeding the labor income, which is not sustainable by any means. So it is really important to prioritize and to think where social protection is needed. And indeed, protecting the most vulnerable is this area. And we cannot expand everywhere. So the most important challenge is to say where we can think about spending less and discussing it with the society. So what we need urgently is really building the social consensus on what are the priorities in the area of social protection, how we can achieve them, but also where the state can step down. Again, one of the obvious candidates, which when we listen to the political discussion is very difficult, is raising the effective retirement age, equalizing the retirement age of men and women. So we repeat that, we researchers and academics, we repeat that almost constantly, and there's little room for maneuver, I would say, from the political perspective on how to do that. But the most important challenge for me is that we indeed need to prioritize, we need to scale down in order to increase in other areas of social protection when spending is needed. And this is indeed energy poverty, it is supporting the most vulnerable, housing and affordable housing for those that cannot have it right now as one of the most important challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe let me stay with you for a second question. I'll go back in the opposite order. So we talked about the social protection system as such, but when we think of the impact of aging on the society more broadly, do you think Poland is well prepared to tackle this challenge? Are there any major changes that need to take place in order to be prepared? This is not something that only Poland has to grapple with, many countries in the region, but how do you see the preparedness here for this?
Yes, the European population is aging to a faster or a slower degree, but we observe it indeed in all of the countries. So it is not only the issue for Poland, but also the European Union, which we see also in the Commission and European Union documents. I think that we are not ready for population aging, which is an unprecedented phenomenon, which has to be mentioned. I mean, we never saw so many people living up to the old age, which is a huge achievement, by the way. So that is something that needs to be underlined. But that also comes with certain challenges and areas when we have a long-term discussion that doesn't lead to solutions that are implemented. Some of it also with the participation of the World Bank, for example, the issue of the long-term care. While we have more and more people living up to the age of 80, 90, 100 plus, our healthcare system and our long-term care system is not that prepared for the increasing share of people needing assistance, increasing share of people having dementia problems and other problems that require long-term care, including long-term care facilities, but also services at the local level, in-home care, deinstitutionalization, which is a very difficult word, but I think very frequently mentioned these days. When we discuss the demographic challenge in Poland, especially in the past years, it has been focused on increasing fertility in a very, let's say, traditionally understood family model. So this is something that we need to step away from. I mean, of course, we need to have a discussion on how to create conditions that more children are born in Poland, because it is one of the challenges, but the other challenge is indeed how we can utilize the human capital that we have, how we can again prolong working age, how we can support those people that live up to the very old age, and we want to have their quality of life being as good as possible given the challenges that we have. So on all of those fronts, we really need to have a coherent policy that goes beyond the silos, and I think this is the challenge that we have ahead.
Thank you very much. Indeed, a huge challenge for the EU more broadly. Paweł, the Draghi report has come up several times already this morning. You yourself mentioned it in the context of the innovation and productivity challenge. What are some of the other key takeaways you have from that report in terms of how it's important for Poland in particular? Is the report heading in the right direction? Does it touch on all the things that are also relevant for Poland? And how do you see what is kind of what are the most relevant points, and how do you see those then adopted here?
Yes, your question is quite good, because probably this is not a report about Poland. It is not a report about neither of European countries. And this is, in my view, one of the biggest, the weakest points of the report, is that too often it speaks about Europe as a whole without acknowledging the diversity of the European economies. When I was reading it, this in-depth part, there is 330 pages related to several sectorial and horizontal policies, and there are 7 maps or charts showing the different quantities of different indicators for the European countries. And the majority of these graphs and maps are concentrated within the energy part. So for the rest, Draghi writes about the Europe, and this is, of course, understandable, because he was commissioned to write it by the President von der Leyen. But if you have 27 countries, you have to acknowledge how to implement those different policies that he is laying out, so as to make sure that majority of those economies will benefit. Because what there is the leading discourse right now in the Brussels is that the Draghi report will be the cornerstone for the new economic narrative, new economic story about how Europe should develop. And we could agree to some of the proposals he has, because there is 20 or so chapters, 10 recommendations for each chapter, so there are around 200 recommendations. Some of them are quite good, we can agree. Some of them, for example, about expanding the energy market, investing in pan-European networks and so on within energy, all these power platforms and so on. We could agree on that. Revising curricula and so on, expanding vocational training, so on. These are recommendations we could agree on. Some are very broad, like Europe should prepare a plan to adapt to AI and cloud computing and so on. So some recommendations are just about we need to focus more on some areas. We need to make plans on those areas. But what's the weakest point is that he does not draw on the complexity of the European economics. He that doesn't show how we would like to, for example, if we agree that Europe, in order to be competitive on the global scale, has to focus some efforts, has to streamline some funds, and has to concentrate some funds, because this is what scientific evidence shows. So, for example, knowledge-intensive industries tend to concentrate around certain sectors and certain geographical areas. So, Draghi's answer is that we, for example, have to invest in several biotechnological clusters around Europe. So then the answer is what the mechanisms for the spillover will be, so as to make sure that if Polish, for example, taxpayer contribute to those clusters in, for example, Spain, Belgium, then Polish companies could somehow take benefits of those clusters. Yes, it is sure that on the large global scale, if you want to play with China, with United States, those are federal or unitary states with different political systems. Europe cannot play by the same rules. We have to make sure that there are some spillover mechanisms. Yesterday we had a meeting with Paolo Gentiloni, the Steel Commissioner for Economy. He says that we have the mechanisms and the mechanism is the single market. But at the same time we are observing some distortions to the single market. Public aid and concentration of public aid being one of the most prominent. So I think that this report, in order to be acceptable for the whole Europe and during the implementation and let's say concretization phase, we need to think much more about the spillover mechanisms and how to ensure that if we invest in European champions, what is the gains for other economies and how Poland will benefit through that. So yes, the report outlines very interesting and it's quite comprehensible. So there are a lot of good ideas, but the main problem is that although we agree that Europe, in terms of, for example, single market, is more than the sum of its parts, sometimes Europe is less than the sum of the parts because the different qualities of these parts make some things much more difficult to implement. So I think this is the biggest challenge ahead of the ideas laid out in the report.
Let me go back to Jolanta. So we know that technology adoption and adopting digital solutions can actually raise productivity for firms. And you mentioned earlier that you see that that SMEs, small medium enterprises, often don't know what to do with the technology. So what can be done to encourage adoption at the firm level of digital solutions, also keeping in mind the potential of artificial intelligence going forward? You know, we have top IT firms here in Poland, but we also have a lot of smaller firms that actually not using digital solutions, and it's below the European average in that sense. So, what are some of the things you think could be done to encourage that the take up of digital solutions by firms?
Thank you very much. Yes, I was reading the reports and some data, and especially among the small companies, this is a challenge. And I think there are several factors that may help, and actually I think they have to be put together while working on this adoption. One definitely are the costs, and we among the business organizations we have discussions about AI adoption since a couple of years, I would say, and surprisingly, even the big companies, the adoption is not that on the level that we were expecting. And the reason is also the cost and the scale. If the company is small, then it's much harder to adopt this future technologies. And it's because of the lack of the availability of the funds, the budgets for that, and this was already discovered by you as well. The other area which is also a challenge for big, but also for small, and for small companies even more, is the regulatory environment, which is unstable. And I'm not only talking about the digital policies, which are coming now, because there will be a huge implementation of many of them, which are sometimes difficult to understand by big companies with strong legal departments. So what to say about the small one, but also tax environment and the stability of this tax environment, which is kind of shaky right now. So that's definitely something that would help companies, and also support from the government, not in the communication, information about the availability of European funds, which are available, and there are many programs which are focused on the small and medium companies. But I still believe it is hard for the companies. They are fear that later on they will have to give it back with the interest. So there is a fear of going and asking for this money. Also because of the still very bureaucratic procedures, and I understand why. This is public money, so to some extent they have to be bureaucratic, but maybe there are some ways to make them easier for the companies. And also there is a role of business organizations like Leviathan in that. So we are not saying that everything should be on the government side, but also on the business organization to, you know, at least among the member companies to share with them the know-how, network, work together, and I guess with the support of the government and European organizations, I'm sure we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolanta. Let me go back to Ari for the last question. You already talked about some of the IFC investments and potential, but more broadly, how do you see the potential of the development of green and decarbonized industries, not just in energy, but maybe beyond that? There are lots of green value chains that are emerging now within the European Union. How do you see the potential in Poland for that? And how do you think Poland is using this potential?
Thank you. Well, maybe before answering the question, I could not agree more with Jolanta and with Paweł on the reasons why most of Polish firms still fail to innovate, in many cases still fail to invest or to take risk, or still fail to invest abroad and compete globally. I think at the root of these causes, there is the simple fact that the Polish economy is still in transition. At the end of the day, the Polish private sector as we know it is born in the 90s. Most of these firms, except a few exceptions, are owned by the same owner or the second generation of business owner. And with quite a significant risk for this continued transition, because as we know, company succession, institutionalization, bringing more external perspective in boards, bringing private equity and people who challenge these enterprises to go and compete abroad. Is a kind of challenging process. As part of this process, I think we see as an important tool integrating more of the Polish firms into new regional value chains. So continuing attracting investment, foreign investment in Poland, to really, and recently the World Bank issued this report about the middle income trap and how economies have moved from middle income to high income. Poland is taken as a model. But still, Poland should not go back to the middle income trap, right? So, and hopefully will not. But really ensuring this continued transition will mean going beyond what has been done so far in the past 30 years. So in that respect, I think that the green transition is an opportunity for Poland to decarbonize its own economy, of course, but at the same time to integrate these new value chains that will position the country as an emerging leader in Europe in the context of Europe overall reorganization. So I mentioned earlier our strategy being very focused on green innovation and climate finance. I mean, the third dimension of our strategy is also building Poland physical, digital, and trade connectivity in the context of these new green value chains. So what does that mean concretely? I mean, let's take the example of offshore wind generation, right? Where I know you told me beyond energy, but it's a good example where Poland has already taken step and is already a first mover somehow in not only attracting investment in offshore wind, but building the necessary building blocks of the new manufacturing value chains. I mean, decarbonized aluminium, decarbonized steel, the logistics value chain around it, the port systems that can support this new added capacity. This will be useful for Romania in 10 years, for Croatia maybe in 5 years, for other countries in the world, and will position Poland in this kind of. So same with e-mobility, right? Poland is already advanced in terms of being one of the first mover in battery manufacturing, in new automotive value chain related to e-mobility. Let's remember that the automotive industry is a very long cycle industry. So the movements that we are seeing are only the beginning of a 20-year period of complete rehaul of what it means to be an automotive manufacturer or an automotive supplier. And so Poland has this opportunity to engage. Of course, it does require the skills. And here, I'd like to think that we mentioned the transition out of coal, we mentioned the impact of the AI, we mentioned the issues related to the creating, for instance, a new system for long-term care that formalizes this new job and put more women in the workforce. I'd like to think that a virtuous circle can be created between all these labor transitions that would really position Poland as an innovator and a leader that everybody will want to follow in the future.
Thank you very much. Let me thank the panel very much for your interesting contributions. I think this was a very nice extension of the topics we discussed in the SCD. And I think these will be topics to be discussed further in Poland in the coming years as the country, as the economy adapts to these various different challenges. With this, again, thank you very much to the panel. And Christoph, do you take over now, or should we open it up for questions? I leave it to you.
Yes. Thank you, Jasmine. Yes, I think we can thank the panel so that you can sit comfortably here, unless there is also some questions. Maybe let me also tell you, here you see this friendly dinosaur and a very familiar QR code. If this will lead you to the report. And yes, now we would like to open the floor for questions. Reena is here, Nathalie, also our panelists. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. And we have some mics, not all, but some working. So we should have, yes, I can see the first hand and second. Weronika, may I ask you for help?
My name is Anna Wnuk. I'm the managing director for Polish Private Equity and Venture Capital Association. It will be more of a comment, less of a question, if I may. I think the recent developments and opportunities that have popped up, such as Polish upcoming presidency, new reports, new commission, sort of gives us just a landscape, environment, and opportunity rather than set of solutions. And what we from the private capital market perspective see is that there's a lot that has to be done on the Polish ground, and that is just the opportunity. We have been given non-solutions in Draghi report, in discussions, and I don't think we should count really on the focus on Poland as much as we may think. There's one, I think, comment in relation to what has been said in the panel is the regulatory barriers that we have to fight. And what we have been doing so far for past months is being a part of plenty of different groups, working groups. I'm looking at you because the Leviathan is leading a perfect group on tax problems, and we have been beneficiaries of the work. That it was a spectacular work together with Ministry of Finance on fighting a problem with withholding tax, which is a dramatic obstacle for private market. So those are the small things that we can do. We're talking a lot about innovation, financing, as mid-level of entrepreneurs and companies. But we are forgetting that there are very, very particular problems that have to be fought. For instance, the definition of small and medium companies that is being sort of changed and lost by those companies when they get private capital, which sort of closes the gate for them to use public capital. So sort of for small markets, well, still not undeveloped markets like Poland, those are the things that we have to go and fight. And I'm not going to take more time, but the Pan-European Association for Private Market Invest Europe has published a forward publication with 12 priorities that should be the solutions, at least for some of the problems, withholding taxes there, approach to a long-term investment and encouragement of pension money flow into the alternative assets. The definition of medium and small companies. So those are the things that I think we should focus on during this great time of opportunity to be there and be seen as one of the markets in Europe. Thank you.
So maybe we will take the time to answer and we will go with next.
If you want to comment on top of the comment.
Okay. Okay. So I think, sir, you were...
Yes. Thank you very much. Jacek Wojciechowicz. I'm both, I teach economics, but I'm also a former World Bank's employee. I worked for a number of years for the Warsaw office. And to start with, I would like to congratulate my former World Bank colleagues and other actually consultants and actually economists who participated in the preparation of this report. It's really extremely important at this stage of the time. And, you know, from my point of view, the most interesting are the areas related to demography, because I'm in this age bracket, and I think that, you know, increasing activity of seniors, improving their participation in the labor force, it's really one of very important issues. It can improve actually the Polish economic situation. I fully agree with everything which was said. Secondly, the area of innovation, digitization, those are extremely important areas. It can also help in terms of productivity of the Polish labor force. I'm a great believer and evangelist in new technologies, especially the artificial intelligence. I was running a company involved in new technologies. Presently, I'm also involved in AI companies, and I think that this is the way to go. Another very important area, investment. As a, you know, in one of my hats as a former manager of a technological company, I've experienced a number of problems trying to actually gain some financing for the companies that I was running, and I'm not going to tell you the stories, but I mean, finally, I was successful reaching towards private investors, But in terms of the institutional support for that sort of thing, especially for startup and new companies, the situation is really very difficult. But I would like to go back to one very important issue, which I was very pleased to observe. One of your areas that you pointed out in your report was voice and accountability. And it happened a long time ago, in 1999, as a World Bank staff member, I was one of the authors of the report called Corruption in Poland. It was published in 1999. It was, at that time, it was a very important report. It dealt with all sorts of issues. And of course, the target was to improve the Polish development, including the economic development. And while the World Bank's capacity in the areas related to investment economics, demography, and you name it, is unchallenged, and you know, I still believe in this great ability of the World Bank to actually assist in form of the technical assistance, I have to say that the area related to governance, anti-corruption, is really at the moment, what I would say is there's a lack of independence governance analytical tools. The World Bank was involved at some stage in the early 2000, preparing reports like Anti-Corruption Transition 1 and 2. And since that, there are no such tools and such reports available. And why I'm mentioning that, because, you know, I observe, and a number of other people, including this particular university, who were involved at some stage in anti-corruption activities, government and all that, we observe that there is a lack of independent reports actually dealing with that issue, and that could also unbundle the concept of corruption. And especially serious is actually something which we called in our report the state capture. Well, I'm active in those sorts of fields. I mean, there are some reports, of course, you know, there's Transparency International, others, but they do not have such a depth as the World Bank could actually provide. So I would like to, you know, just put on the table to my former World Bank colleagues this area, because I think that we should actually revisit it. We had great reports in the past, including Doing Business. I was involved in preparing those reports as well. They played a very important role at some stage, then they were discontinued. But I think that it's time actually to revisit some of those areas. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Wiew Polanski. I'm from Warsaw School of Economics. Can you hear me? And my question is simple and short. It's about foreign direct investments. No one of you mentioned this investments, this type of investments, and they were very important in the first period of our transition. So are we so developed nowadays that we don't need foreign direct investment when reaching the last mile of convergence? What's the reason that you didn't mention at all this phenomenon? Thank you.
Thank you. Eliza Przejdziecka, Warsaw School of Economics. I also would like to highlight an issue. What I really miss in your analysis is the role of migrants, of immigrants to Poland. And there is a very dynamic discussion right now with regards to the migration policy in Poland particularly. I'm not talking about all of this stuff at the union level, European Union level, but we are struggling with comments with regards to the issue of visas and how Poland has been opened administratively to illegal immigration on the one hand side, but with all of that problematic issues with regards to the decreasing productivity in manufacturing and the labor-intensive sectors, we do have a lack of labor in many areas of business, and one of the raising problem by business very often is simply lack of a labor force. And with regards to the foreign direct investments, I personally think that it's actually one of the biggest advantage of this country, offering over 16 million people in the market. however, is the effect of our population and the market per se, but not something that was strictly created by the economic policy. So then I matched to migration policy, how it might be a source of a new stream of labor force to the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have two outstanding questions on FDI and on migration. Yes? Okay. So Ari, Naim, FDI.
Actually, dear Zbigniew, I did mention FDI and attracting these new green value chains as a way to actually help the Polish firms step up in terms of innovation and governance. So, yes, you are absolutely right. I think that Poland has been very successful in attracting FDI in very specific value chain in the past 30 years. It needs to continue doing so in those new value chains that are the value chains that matter for Europe today in the context of Europe's strategic autonomy agenda, green transition agenda, etc. So definitely we see attracting foreign direct investment as a very important way to bring innovation from outside within. But of course, I mean, Poland is at a stage where it also innovates itself. So, but this continues to be, I would say, a dialogue between innovation coming from outside and innovation getting out from within.
Thank you. On the question of migration, I view that as a broader question, actually, from the perspective of labor shortages. And I see it as fundamentally intertwined with this question of how one handles the aging process and demographic changes. Because actually, when you look at Poland compared to other Central Eastern European countries, the reduction in the labor force as a consequence of emigration has, in some sense, been more muted in Poland than in other countries. It's still been significant, but we see other countries that are losing 25 to 30% of working age populations, particularly of certain brackets. But when you look beyond the lens of Poland at the gmina and the voivodeship level, you see, of course, that in certain gminas you have a depopulation that impacts not just businesses because they are unable to find local labor, but you see it also in gmina offices. So I've traveled to gminas where there's one staff doing 3 different functions. And as with an aging population that requires greater public service delivery, it then obviously is going to tax the local population even more. How do you find the individuals to deliver the long-term care and so forth needed? So stepping back, migration, of course, is one of the solutions that is available to Poland. And in fact, we've been seeing an increase in this area, for our knowledge, within Europe more broadly, because fundamentally this question of how to integrate populations in a manner that is both productive and ensures appropriate protections, that requires a balance of ensuring that all of your institutions are able to support this population that previously hasn't been there. And we've seen it more visibly in the last 3 to 4, maybe 5 years. But we anticipate this, of course, will be an area where there'll need to be a strategy in place, not just from the national perspective as to how to ensure that these populations are protected, but also ensuring that capacity is available subnationally. We saw how difficult this was with the influx of many of the million Ukrainians that came to Poland. Of course, you can put in place the national frameworks to ensure that they're supported holistically, but fundamentally it was the service providers, the local governments that were stepping forward and ensuring that the populations were able to be integrated sufficiently. So this will require that vision to actually make it happen successfully. Thanks.
Okay, so I have one more question. Mariusz Hanradło, Warsaw School of Economics. Quite recently, together with economists from European Investment Bank, we investigated investment barriers in European Union member states, including Poland. And I'm talking about this because you mentioned investment as one of problems that Poland may face. And in fact, Poland has lowest level of investment in relation to GDP compared to other EU member states and Central and Eastern European countries. But focusing on identified barriers, apart from regulations that you mentioned, we have problems with high energy prices in all European countries, and this, the importance of this barrier increased in recent 2 years. And this is based on survey done by European Investment Bank. But apart from this, we have problems with uncertainty about the future, access to the workforce, and regulations are somewhere in the middle. Fortunately, we do not have very big barriers related to infrastructure. Nonetheless, still we have problems in some areas. And comparing to other countries, I'm not sure whether this is also included in your report. Poland is characterized by one of highest barriers in the European for investments in the European Union. So my question is how to overcome these barriers and how to, especially these concerning energy prices, because if energy prices are a barrier for investment, then if we want to invest in in development of energy sector, then we have a problem. And so how to overcome these barriers and how to make companies to invest more, because this is, I think this is a very difficult problem, but very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Monika Woźniak. I am from Polish Agency for Entrepreneurship Development at Warsaw University. And when combined these two perspectives, I heard one thing in terms what is the scope of this report, that there is a really big gap in terms of labor skills and the innovation ecosystems. But I don't even heard anything about the quality of higher education system, because a lot of time we say, okay, we are excellent in the PISA test in terms of skill of our pupils, but when we check the rankings of higher education institution, we are on the 300th position in terms of the best university in Poland. So something is happening during the higher education period of time, that these great pupils are not good researchers after all. So this is my question. How do you want to address this in terms of the conclusion from the report? So thank you very much.
Hello, Andrzej Nikołajczuk. I am from Warsaw School of Economics. My question is short. What is your comment regarding excessive deficit procedure? Because Poland is now again, and of course it is related to very large expenses, social and defense army.
Yeah? Oh, yes, okay. Sitting in a room filled with some great researchers, I would almost want to plead the fifth on that one. No, but I actually was thinking about this too, because you do see that the PISA scores are really amongst the top in Europe, and despite the deterioration, you see that this continues, and yet, and I'll pause on that. And yet, you do see that that boys, in particular, I think there is an issue. So breaking apart those PISA scores, I do think there's an issue with boys. When you see that they're tracked into vocational training at an early age, increasingly for boys, and you see that the disparities in scores are actually not insignificant. There I see that some of your potentially great pupils are not actually making their way through to higher education. More broadly, this question of incentives and scope for research and focus. It is the financial incentives have not always been aligned to ensuring that the best pupils remain within academia, but more broadly, the time allocated for allowing these researchers to fully flourish relative to their teaching obligations. Every country has their different approach when it comes to allowing for tenure-track professors to basically focus in on their research. And I think the question we have to ask in Poland is that balance correct? Is there enough focus and time devoted and able for that research to flourish? But the financing issue, I think, is something which has really been put on the table, and it was already put on the table before. If you don't prioritize financing for research and innovation, then it will, the individuals looking for those opportunities will clearly flow elsewhere. I'm always struck when I read, I get regular publications from across all the European journals and the US. I'm always struck by the number of Polish names and Polish researchers that I recognize on them. Maybe the Polish researchers currently are not only within Poland, but they're moving abroad, in part because of these financing and incentives. On the EDPs, I'm going to hand it to my colleague. But on this question from EIB colleague on investment, and I'm sure Nathalie will follow up on this too, I mentioned also the need to deepen capital markets. Clearly, financing, when you're looking for 80% bank financing, you can. There is scope, of course, to facilitate via private equity and beyond. But just to note that when it comes to institutions, uncertainty, regulations, here and I'd like to come back to the colleague who asked about the VC, here we're looking about institutions big and small. And I think the examples that she put on the table of some of the impediments faced from the startup community, also from looking for venture capital, those institutions small, those uncertainties, the planning, the application process and the permitting, they ultimately end up feeding into limited investment. In renewables, it's very clear that when you have multiple barriers going from spatial planning to licensing to policy uncertainty, one alone by itself is not going to break the back. When you have 3 or 4 contributing at an aggregate, of course, that then pulls back your aggregate investment levels. Thanks.
Right. So I will take on the EDP. I don't know. I don't feel it's such a contentious question in the sense like Poland has been put on the EDP. It's not only Poland that is facing this issue, right? There's a lot of countries in the EU, and it's just part of the times, right? It's been a lot of crisis. There's been an increase in fiscal spending over the last years, and due to external shocks that has affected countries across the globe. It's not only in Europe, even it's everywhere. So now it's time to consolidate, and the question is how to do it in the most effective way. And I think Poland has different options. It can look at it from the revenue side or the expending side. And the question is, on the spending side, how will it do it to maintain the social spending, the needs for on the green transition, how to... Exactly, they're all needed. So you have to ring fence those that are needed, and you have to spend more efficiently then, right? So that's the only option. And so, for example, in the report, one area that I think Reena has pointed at is on social expenditures, right? How, for example, you could do more targeted spending on safety nets, on just to make sure that they're targeting the poor and not more broadly, so that you spend more efficient and still contribute to reduce inequalities, right? So that's an area. We are starting a public expenditure review in the area of long-term care, right? So that's also an area where you could look at ways of spending more efficient. But of course, it's not easy. It's not easy anywhere. Another area is to look at revenues. How do you improve tax collection and tax policy? Someone mentioned about withholding tax. There's a lot of areas where you could see how to have a more efficient tax policy that will generate more revenue. There's been a lot of policy changes over the last years as well that did not contribute to increased tax revenue. And one of the key reasons why the fiscal deficit is also not changing is because revenues are expected to be lower. So there's a lot of areas where that can be looked at. There's also how you finance the deficit, right? It's debt. The cost of the debt is also an important area. So that's an area that, I mean, it's been rising a lot in recent years. So that's also something that the Polish government will need to look at, how to ensure that sustainability in a way that, they borrow responsibly, but at the same time, they traditionally they have been borrowing a lot in domestic currency. They have been they issued like a large Eurobond, for example, this year at the beginning of the year. But what is the most effective way to finance the budget? And then that's also why, for example, private sector, leveraging the private sector, for example, on the green transition. It will have to be financed a lot by the private sector. And so that relates to the question of removing barriers for private sector participation on the regulatory framework, on all those areas. So I think they're all interlinked in a sense. So I don't know if anyone wants to.
Maybe just a word about this foreign direct investment. For years, we've been discussing that a large part of Polish growth is FDI-led. And right now, the challenge is we have to once again change the paradigm. It doesn't mean we can resign from accepting FDIs, but we have to, let's say, create more selective policies of attracting and supporting FDIs. So we have two problems of FDIs. First of all, there are low to mid-tech FDIs in a majority, and there is too little R&D or administrative managerial FDIs in Poland. So we have to find out how to attract these higher end FDIs. The second problem is that there is a lot of in contrast to Polish export, Polish foreign direct investment is concentrated from some areas of the world. So we have to find the ways to diversify the sources of this FDI. And everything, and this challenge is in the environment in which there is a huge rivalry, global rivalry for most advanced FDIs. Semiconductors is the first example. We have the problem with this Intel investment, which have been put on hold. But now when you read several industrial strategies around Poland, even from developed countries like Germany, Sweden, for example, they're all speaking about attracting more advanced high-end technologies, FDI. So right now we are not only competing with Hungary, Czech Republic, and so on, we are competing with Germany, which has much more fiscal space to support its through public aid. So I think this is also one of the challenges to reconstruct our thinking about what kind of FDI we attract from which sources and how we streamline the sources to support these most advanced companies, because this is the challenge. We cannot maintain the level of the technological advancement of the FDI we've been accepting, we've been working on in order to move up on the ladder of development.
On the question related to the university's position in global rankings, it is a very complex issue, which, I mean, takes time because there is certain dependency path, which is very difficult to speed up, first and foremost. Second, I've already mentioned the issue of financing of higher education and research and development. With 1.7% of GDP envisaged in the next year's budget, it is really not something that provides, for example, financing for, especially for young researchers to pursue with the research. If we look at the National Science Center right now, in order to, I mean, the success rate with the grants is, I think, lower than within the Horizon project. So that shows that the issue of financing, but also talent competition. I mean, if we compare private versus public, so let's say salaries, it's very difficult to attract young researchers to stay in the academia. So mainly they combine private and public work, and that unfortunately comes at the price of lower research results. So this is something that we observe, that it's very difficult to attract and retain young researchers within universities. And we also compete with the world around. So the most talented researchers obviously also seek their opportunities and research development in other countries. So there's a lot of challenges within the higher education to compete with those rankings. We need also smart policies related to the research assessment, and this is something that we've been discussing with the government for a long time. That, you know, seeking the points according to the ministry list is not exactly the way how we can improve the quality of our research, but it's another issue how we can really assess the quality of our research output, how we can increase the capacity to compete internationally with other universities. It is a long way, and we definitely need to have a good discussion on funding, on assessment, retaining talents.
Very much for your comments and questions. We will have the opportunity to also talk later, but for now, I would like to thank the panel and invite our regional director for Europe from the International Finance Corporation, Ines Rocha, for some final remarks.
Thank you so much. First of all, wonderful to be here in this one great building. I know it's just brand new, but it looks wonderful and great light. So very delighted to be here. So just thank you for the Warsaw School of Economics on behalf of the World Bank Group and all the participants present. The SCD updates, which is reaching the last mile of conversion, is really one of the pieces of the series of deep analytics that the World Bank Group is using to drive our strategy and partnership with Poland for 2025 to 2029 period. And as part of this series, I would mention in particular, so we had a 2022 country economic memorandum called the Green Transformation in Poland. And we have seen, so how much the green and climate change and transition is important just in the debate we had here. And then we also have linked to that, the upcoming country climate and development report, which is expected to be published in November, just ahead of the COP as well. And the CCDR will explore options for Poland to maximize growth dividends of the green transition in an accelerated scenario, and also quantify what is needed in terms of investments and make policy recommendations to unlock these investments, both on the public and the private side. And we look forward to discussing the CCDR findings very soon once this is also published. And very clearly, after decades of impressive success, Poland is now facing new challenges and opportunities. And in fact, we come at a time where we just experience very dramatic floods. And I want to express also my sympathy for all the negative impact and casualties here and also in Poland. But this calls for renewed thinking of policymakers. And the World Bank Group is highly committed to support Poland in tackling the most complex development challenges with a selective focus of areas that we can bring in a specific lens and also added value. And we expect this new strategic cycles, which starts with a SCD and also ends with our country partnership framework as well later on, will leverage Poland's quite unique role as a source of global public goods, innovation, and knowledge that is highly relevant for the rest of the world. Our upcoming partnership will also emphasize private capital mobilization and partnerships in line with the new World Bank evolution roadmap. And as IFC representative, I am particularly excited at the perspective of opening up space and expanding the pie for a more vibrant Polish private sector in the country, the border region, and globally, also with the support of the World Bank Group. And we will achieve this by catalyzing innovation, de-risking projects, mobilizing capital at scale, but also pushing for some of these reforms that we have been discussing. Well, thank you again, and I'll be delighted also to network later on. Thanks.